So today we're looking at the most commonly answered incorrect questions from or incorrect answers on questions from the unit test of the first unit of the seventh grade course on Khan Academy, the negative numbers, additions, and subtraction unit, and this is the unit test for those. So on this test so far. Um, 6 questions have been more commonly answered incorrect than others. So we're going to take a look at these. Okay, so taking a look here at a number line, we've been given estimations of these numbers. We can see that there's the uniform scale right here. But first of all, let's just take a look at what we're being asked to get. So we're being asked to get a minus negative b. Right? Okay, and is that greater than, less than, or equal to a? Okay. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at taking away from a, right? We're looking at taking away from a value that is equal to negative b. Okay. So if we were to take away b, right? Let me draw a number line right here. Right. If we were to take away b, and we've got say a right here, and there's your 0. And here's your b right here. Okay. If we were just to subtract b, we'd be going in this direction. That would be minus b, right? Okay. And we'd end up, I don't know, the distance here is around about right there. Okay. But we're not being asked to subtract b. We're being asked to subtract negative b. So subtracting negative b, if we remember what we were looking at, is subtracting a negative is the same as adding the opposite. So if we look at subtracting negative b, a minus negative b, that's the same as saying a plus positive b, or a plus b. So we can start at a, and we can look at this value of b, and we can move it in this direction right here. And this gives us a plus b, right? Or a plus negative b. So that's our estimation right here. We can see already that it's closer to 0, that this value here, a minus negative b, is closer to 0 than a is, okay? Which means that it must be greater than 0. So that, therefore, we conclude that a minus negative b is greater than a. So there's the first one, okay? And indeed, if you were to look at the hints, it gives you something along those lines as well. You can see it. Let's estimate there this a minus negative b on the number line. And they did exactly what I just showed you here to do. And you can see that it's greater than. Okay. Let's look at the next question. So once again, we've been given a problem here, this time with numbers, right? And we have some subtracting a negative and some adding a negative as well. Let's break it down the same way as we broke down the previous one, okay? So we've got negative 3.28 minus a negative 4.4 plus a negative p. And we're being told that negative p, right? Negative p is, we're being told that p is equal to 9.7, right? So we're going to rewrite this with p equals 9.7. So we have here, we have negative 3.28 minus that negative 4.4. And now we have plus a negative, and we're going to put in our p, 9.7. Notice that I'm preserving the negative from the original question, recognizing that it's only the p that I'm substituting in, the negative remains. That's the first most common error that students make. The second thing is I'm going to look at the same concept we looked at in the previous one and note that subtracting a negative is the same as adding the opposite. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to rewrite this here. So we got negative 3.28, and I'm subtracting a negative, so I'm going to add the opposite, which is adding a positive, right? So that just becomes a plus, right? So this is adding the opposite, so it becomes a plus, so it's plus 4.4. And I already have addition here, so adding a negative is the same as subtracting, so I can just make that as a negative. Plug in 9.7. And let's work from left to right. Okay, so working from left to right, if we just take this first part right here, ignore that negative 9.7 or subtracting 9.7 there for a moment, and if we look at the operation with two different signs, so combining together two numbers with two different signs, we always subtract and we keep the bigger sign. So we're going to keep it as positive. We know it's going to be positive, and we're just going to do a simple 4.4 minus 3.28. Okay, so it's 4.40 minus 3.28. We're going to borrow, right? We're going to borrow right here, and that gives us 1.12. So we have 1.12. We know that it's positive because we keep the bigger sign, right? We keep this bigger sign, and we go from there. So now we have 1.12 minus 9.7. Okay, same idea here. If we consider this being a positive 1.12, we can say, well, all we need to do is do a subtraction between the two and keep the bigger sign being this 9.7 is a bigger number, so the sign negative remains. So we're going to bring that negative right down. Okay, we're going to bring that negative right down, and all we're going to do separately is we're going to look at this idea of 9.7 minus 1.12. And that gives us 8.58, and it's in the negative, so it gives us negative 8.58. Okay. Right. So again, just to clarify, it's all about adding the opposite, right? When you've got two negatives going together, and when you're combining two numbers with two different signs, it is all about just doing a subtraction and keeping the bigger sign. Okay, and you may see the same kind of thing with the hints right here. We substitute it in first, and you can see we're adding the opposite right here, and then finally we're just subtracting right there, which is the same thing as what we did before. Okay, let's look at the next question. So the next question here is about what number works for this. Okay, what number will actually work for k for this particular one? So we have 17 equals negative 14 plus k. Okay, now there's a few different ways we can think of this, but essentially, if you're thinking of this in the simplest possible way, you are looking for the number 17 and you're starting at negative 14. So if you drew a number line, for example, right, if you drew a number line, you're starting down at negative 14. You've got 0 somewhere here, and you are trying to get to 17, right? How many spaces is it to get from negative 14 up to 17? Okay. And if you think about it that way, all you're really doing is you're adding 17 plus 14, and that there is going to give you 31. Okay, so we recognize here that k must be 31, right? Because there's 31 spaces between negative 14 and 17. Okay, so that's not immediately obvious to everybody. Another way of looking at this one here is if we were to rewrite it and use the algebraic method for this. So if we start with 17 equals negative 14 plus k, and then we add 14 to both sides of the equation, recognize you can do the same thing on both sides of the equation and keep the truth of the equation. This negative 14 plus 14 would cancel out. 17 plus 14 would become 31, and the rest of the equation would follow. Okay, so this here is the algebraic method. This here is just looking at it as a number line. Let's take a look at what the hints give us. All right, so this is the algebraic method, just written a different way. It's exactly what they're doing. They're subtracting a negative 14, which is the same as adding a 14, which gets rid of the 14. Right? and we have 17 plus 14. So again, subtracting a negative 14 is the same as adding. You get 31. This, I think, is a little bit more complex than what we showed in the drawing before. The key thing that they're indicating here, subtracting is the same as adding the opposite. And that's actually the lesson that we're being asked to learn. The question can be answered in multiple different ways, I think. Okay. So the next question right here that we're looking at right here, again, it's adding the opposite. This is quite a simple question. It's unknown why so many people are getting it wrong. Probably because of the variable. If we look once again, -1 and subtracting the negative is the same as adding the positive. I'm going to put a line through there so we know it's a z. So what is this when we know that z is equal to -2? Right? So we're going to plug in -2, so z equals -2. So we're going to plug in, so z equals -2, right? And that gives us -1 minus, now be careful here, -1 minus -2. Now this will be the reason why so many people got this one wrong. Okay, so being very careful that the z is the only thing we're substituting in. We're being told z is -2. Okay, and so we've got a ton of negatives in here that we must reconcile first. Okay, so let's first deal with the very furthest inside piece. -2 is positive, so that part there now gives us -1 minus +2, so that gives us -2. And we can combine this together at this point. We recognize two signs the same, we add them together, and therefore we keep the sign, so this is going to be equal to -3. Okay, let's look at how the hints dealt with it. Substituting it in, we can see here it's looking at it exactly the same way as we did. Okay, recognize that if you do use the hints and you get a question wrong because you use the hints, that make a note of the step by step, because it's really important to internalize what you're learning, which is why I'm drawing it out for you. Okay, another problem, similar problems again that everybody's getting wrong. The substitution in of the variable. What is the solution of that variable? So once again, we got some negatives in here. Negative 10.74 equals the letter U minus -11, right? And once again, we could look at this as a number line. Okay, we could absolutely look at this as a number line. We've got decimals in here, so I'm not going to look at it as a number line. Ideally, we've got negative 10.74 here. We got a negative 11, and we're trying to reconcile u. So what we're going to do is we are going to first deal with these two negatives. Recognize that subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. So we're going to rewrite that first to simplify our equation. Simplifying things is always the best thing to do if you can do it. Okay, so this subtracting a negative just becomes adding the opposite, and that's a plus now. Okay, so now the algebraic method looks a little bit easier. Once again, we could absolutely write a number line like we did before, and we could say, well, okay, I'm starting up here at 11. I've got to go through 0. There's 0 right there, and I've got to get all the way down to negative 10.74. You can see the distance is great. You add them together. This is just going to be 21.74 because 11, so it's going to be 21.74 is the distance between 11 and negative 10.74. That's what the distance is. Okay, let's take a look at it from the algebraic point of view. The algebraic method is always going to be the most accurate, so long as you perform it accurately, right? All we're going to do here is we're going to subtract 11 from both sides. Okay, subtracting 11 from both sides cancels out this 11 here. We're doing the opposite is what we're doing, right? Okay, so we've got 11 minus 11. that gives us u on this side, because the 11s are gone. And now we have 10.74 minus 11, right? So you get 10.74 minus 11. So negative 10.74 minus 11. So we're adding them together, and we've got the negative here, right? Remember I said the distance, right? The distance is what we were looking at. And this is why using the number line won't always work, because the number line is just giving you the distance, right? The signs are essential, right? So this is the only way that you're going to get the guaranteed the correct answer, right? The distance is only going to give you the absolute value. Okay, so we can see here, there's the algebraic method in operation again, right? We're just isolating that u. Okay, let's take a look at this final question. Right, we've got some fractions in here. It's a surprise we haven't had them earlier. At this point here, these fractions here are not they're not complex. These ones here, you do have to get some common denominators in here. So let's work on that first. 6/3 plus negative 1/6 is equal to what? Okay. Well, common denominators. We're going to need this. This third we're going to have to deal with. So we want everything in sixths. Okay. So in sixths we have. This is going to be, we're going to be doubling, so multiplying above and below by 2 gives us 12 sixths is equivalent, is the equivalent fraction to 6/3 plus negative 1/6. Right. Okay, so adding a negative is the same as subtracting, okay? It's just subtracting, so all we're doing here is we're subtracting the denominators stay the same. We're just subtracting the numerator. So 12 plus negative 1, or 12 minus 1, is equal to 11, and we get ourselves 11/6. And once again, that's what you're going to see here in the hints. They've broken it out into a mixed number as well as an improper fraction. Either way works. So those there are the 6 most commonly answered incorrect questions from that first unit test. If they come up, that's something that you will now be able to do.